great. Apologies for not being there on site with you. Hartmut said that the sun came out, so that would have been nice to have seen. And thanks also for setting up this online link, and I hope it's going to work for us. We'll see how it goes. I haven't done a Skype presentation for 4 or 5 years, online sort of thing, but I think it could work. So my paper is, for the workshop is, I've entitled it Working Towards Critical Realism, Scientific and Power Politics, Democratic Decline. And in the paper, I'm really just beginning something, a preliminary provisional exploration of how one might discover or recover some grounded basis for critical engagement with realist analysis and action, which, as most of the papers for the conference have done, is rooted in large part on the thinking and the writing of Hans Morgenthau. At the same time, I'm wanting to try and ground this in a sense of what Morgenthau regarded as always shifting or fluid material, spatial, temporal situations that political analysts and political actors are caught within. Whatever we want to call this, Mannheim's and Morgenthau's Standortgebundenheit, Anna Haraway's situated knowledges, what C. Wright Mills would call the sociological imagination. I think it's crucial to interweave the strands of discursive interactions with the textures of what I present in the paper of concursive engagement. And I think accepting these shifting situations of political analysis and action cannot ignore the recurring, the renewed, heating quality, the group and the levels that approximate a mix of pragmatic precepts for analysis as well as conceptualized concepts for action that allow us to push forward with actualizing political decisions and debates in always new conditions, but recurrent qualities and unexpected complications. How's that working? Better?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good, excellent. So I think returning to Morgenthau and his fairly convincing and critical characterizations of politics among nations is important for developing a more systematic critique because of his sense of realism is simultaneously an epistemic project regarding how we can analyze and understand politics, as well as maybe an ethical project regarding how the character, social individuality of political agents might be shaped directly by a clearer understanding of theory, a larger sense of historical experience, and a more comprehensive grasp on the context to promote more effective, which often, is in Morgenthau's terms, interest-supported pragmatic action. And in doing this, I think it's important for critical realism as a project to avoid a couple of pitfalls. One is, if you will, the endless reruns in a disciplinary discourse in which, if you want to refer to, say, Arendt's notion of animal laborans, appears as Bourdieu's homo academicus, that is, producing and consuming the same kind of disciplinary arguments in the same formulaic manner for the same intellectual markets in academic collegiate life worlds in every generation that academics haven't really created, don't own, will not change, but at the same time cannot forsake due to their entrapment in what remains often fairly depoliticized, deactivated, or disengaged routines of political correctness in which their professorial sphere is displaced or destroyed in the groundedness of work in a larger public sphere. It's not that academics don't necessarily, or theorists don't necessarily have a clearer sense a clear sense at least, of what political choices could be, but it often gets sidetracked by the goings on within disciplinary currents and university politics, careers, pursuits, etc., which makes it easier for, if you will, quote unquote, real world decision makers to ignore them even more than they might otherwise. And then at the same time, I think a real good advantage of Morgenthau is he definitely sidesteps, avoids, tries to stay away from this abstract grand vision of liberal universalism. He doesn't get trapped either in a large grand theory or some approved apparatus for abstract empiricism that crowds out the actual concrete issues or problems to be understood with a fairly incapacitating methodological Puritanism or a desolating abstract moralism, which also can sometimes cause some self-inflicted irrelevance or institutionalized political neglect within the way that university or intellectual observations about the real world are regarded within the world of politics. So I guess in this paper, which, you know, is, like I said, a very preliminary attempt to talk about these issues, my discussion more or less focuses on three domains. The first, I'd like to think about how we could develop some initial considerations about the complementarities or parallels or ties between Morgenthau and what might be broadly considered in some generic sense critical theory. Marxian, neo-Marxian, Frankfurt School, North American, post-1960s, to sort of distance the discussion of international politics from the, what you would consider the doxastical sense of globalism, neorealism, liberal internationalism, to stake out some coordinates of the very complex trajectory today of the disruption in sovereignty, a very weak sense of legalism, but at the same time, if you will, so here a little section from the paper. So, given the rapid disintegration of the Soviet Union, and then the geopolitical suspension of the Cold War's one fairly existential entities, can one ask if the grand strategic agendas of national power are dissipating as well? The politics among nations maybe no longer revolves around militant ideological foes intent upon absolute opinion. Instead, increasingly, countries are transfixed 24/7 by money flowing through many complex economic and cultural markets as their ruling elites fret about the stability of fiscal and monetary instruments, parochial security rather than the military means of their country's national security. Rather than asking what enables a nation state to demand its citizens be willing to die for it, often the citizenry now guides to ask the nation state to guarantee their parochial financial securities as an endless circle of entitlement to individual prosperity, personal wealth, and safe employment. Friendlessness and hopelessness seem to prevail in these times of constant competition and low-intensity conflict. These shifts maybe highlight how all of the commercial contradictions in the world economy and society is particularly fragile or sensitive at the present time. Anything meant to understand this remarkable moment in everyday life must contribute to the history of actuality. Kind of where I was is a critique of what we're saying, doing, and thinking in the current moment, a historical ontology of ourselves, which at the current moment seems to be caught up in the very turbid currents of the post-Cold War era's boom and bust cycles of bubble economics, the aftermath of the 20th century's grand strategy is the 21st century's tinsel tactics, when and where the shining cities on the hill have turned into selling shoddy housing at inflated property prices to unqualified buyers in declining markets propped up by failing banks, all supported by cheap oil, fast money, and heavily indebted national governments, and in turn seems to be turning the entire financial structure of what is supporting this into a somewhat shaky apparatus. Secondly, I try to map out some doubts about IR theory to account for this context, situation, and fluidity in the present conditions in a manner that finds some complementarities between Morgenthau and thinkers in, I guess, what one would consider structuralist, postmodern, or critical IR terms, suggesting that there are a lot of complementarities that have gone unnoticed. And here, part of the paper is a contestation of neorealism and the way neorealism is worked, and sort of doubts about this. So again, a little excerpt from the paper. To what extent are neo-realist discourses rhetorical reactors that reprocess often unreactive or inert subnational, supranational, or intranational activity into the unstable isotopes of national sovereignty, whose eminent oppositions might generate some governmentalizing effects in international relations. International relations, international politics are in part a rhetoric required to relate intranationally by projecting new totalizing equations of political opposition over domestic populations and interior expanses of space. So here, following Rick Ashley, thus as an aspect of modern statecraft, international politics is a practice of the inscription of the dangerous, externalization and totalization of dangers, and the mobilization of populations to control these dangers in the name of a social totality that isn't really present, that always contains traces of the outside within, that is never more than an effect of the practices by which total dangers are inscribed. So the ritualistic fears of global anarchy expressed in neo-realist theory simply cannot be matched to a world where there are dense, complex networks of collaboration, both intranationally and internationally, via well-established practices in culture, commerce, and coercion. Once again, the realism that Morgenthau accepted was one in which there was really very little anarchy in world affairs. And then the third, I guess, domain that I look at in the paper is how exploring the post-Cold War era is one that really doesn't fit many existing frameworks of analysis well, and its more depoliticized, apolitical, or post-political qualities are to a certain extent anticipated and understood better by Morgenthau than almost any other thinker in international politics. Indeed, his doubts about scientific man should return us to more foundational questions about judging the acumen of national, global, or local elites in control of political life, with new questions such as, how does knowledge articulate power? What kind of power can be mediated through that knowledge? Whose knowledge is used to dominate whom? And how do the various divisions and conflicts develop from unequal power and knowledge? So in marking the end of the Cold War, one finds new conditions of blurred boundaries. Insider, outsider seem to melt with the coincidedness of global threats. Multiple nation states coexist in a planetary system where who is inside and outside, friend or foe, ally or antagonist, is often very unclear. Power persists in the influence of those exerting it and those over which it is exerted, but friend and enemy relations bog down more often in friendlessness or enemylessness in situations of continual conflict, which is actually envisioned as a kind of emergent condition of amity, if not peace. So, like Marx, there's much in Morgenthau that could enable us to clarify consciousness, explain all the consequences of action, to act in accord with interests most suited to time, context, tension of the moment. Yeah, in the last part, what I was trying to do is I think in the spirit of a workshop, try and draw some ties between my analysis and your analysis of Morgenthau's epistemic some sense fixes notion of realism and Morgenthau's critical thought, some connections in turn with William's ideas of the parallels in some postmodern thought and Morgenthau, and then also Daniel's sense of the limits of theory, and to a certain extent, I think the ideas of Michael's willful realism.